Anybody know where that reference is from? Tap, tap, tap-a-roo.
I learned how to sing.
Just tap it in.
Then I thought I wanted
Tap it
money.
in. Give it
I
a
could
little
buy
tap.
a nice thing.
Tap, tap, tap-a-roo.
Hello, family friends. Amber here. I thought I would interrupt my Disney series to bring you this video today because it is somewhat timely and we're in the season right now. I am home and I am helping Frank do some of our sap collecting and maple syrup. So we just had our first weekend here in Canada where the temperatures allowed for some of the sap to flow, and we boiled off our first batch of sap. So I thought I would bring some tips and tricks to you that are kind of timely and somewhat relevant and things that we've learned. So I do have some notes here that I've taken from some reliable resources, and while I am certainly in the learning stage and I am still very much a student in this entire homesteading venture, Frank and I are learning a lot, and I thought it was kind of our desire to share some of the things that we're learning with you guys. So grab your coffee, sit down, and hopefully you enjoy.
Somehow there are other places.
The first thing is season. What is the maple season? The maple syrup season. Here in Ontario, it runs about a 3 to 4 week period, usually around the beginning of March, sometimes the mid of March to the beginning of April, is our maple syrup season. And the ideal temperature for our sap to run is a -5 at night and a +5 during the day. So that's like in Fahrenheit, that works out to be like a -5 is 23 Fahrenheit to about a 41, 42 degree Fahrenheit during the day. So as long as you're getting that swing of the cool temperatures at night and the warmer temperatures during the day, your sap will start to flow. So we are experiencing quite a bit of sap flow this season. Last season, I don't think that we had nearly as much. We had a bit of a peculiar season. So it has to do with the weather and whether or not you have a good season or not. So a lot of producers, larger producers, find certain years better than others, just like gardening, right? So we are going to be running our second boil off this weekend, and our first boil off we just did last weekend, and this is what our little golden stuff. This is what we got. So in the grading, we refer to as amber. It is really quite an amber color. There's a lot more darker colors and lighter colors based on the sap that flows out of the trees, and that's kind of what you get. The second thing is identifying the maples. So last year was our first year. We tapped oak trees. We didn't really know. We had researched what we thought was a maple. We just didn't know for sure because they didn't have their leaves on them, right? So it was hard for us to identify exactly what was a maple. So we went through the spring once we realized and we could identify what the leaf looks like and what the bark looked like to identify some more of the sugar maples that we had here in our bush. So you can get sap production out of a sugar maple, which is usually the highest sugar content, what will give you the sweetest syrup, and the least amount of sap required to boil off. So that's kind of, there's also red maples, black maples, and silver maples. All produce sap and will produce a good syrup. So it depends on where you get it from, but most producers, large producers, will collect the sap from a sugar maple. And we do identify, we've got some red and we do have a few silvers here on the property, but mostly we've been tapping sugars as well. The third thing is the tapping itself. We had identified that maybe we had tapped a few trees that were too small. The care of the tree and the growth of the tree, you should not tap a tree anything less than 10 inches in diameter. So smaller trees should not be tapped. Anything that's between a 10 and 16 inch diameter, you can put one tap in. And if you have a tree that is about 16 inches in diameter or greater, you can go ahead and put in 2 taps per tree. You should never put more than 2 taps. Some will put in 3 depending on how big the tree is. You can get away with 3, but definitely no more than that, or you'll start to cause damage to the tree.
And rule of thumb is your arm span is 72 inches. So if you reach around the tree and you can't touch your fingers, you can do 3 taps. Please take care of us this year and I'll take care of you, girly. You're a big girl. Okay.
And your drill bit as well. It should be the same size diameter of your taps. So like if you have like a 5/16 tap, use a 5/16 drill bit. So, and it should only be about 2 inches in depth. Going into the tree. Any further than 2 inches will not make the sap flow any faster, and it could potentially cause damage to the actual maple tree. Placing new holes each season is somewhat important. It is labor intensive, and that's another reason why maple syrup can be so expensive, because it has to be done at the end of each season. The taps do need to be relocated from the tree, so you can't leave the taps in after the season, or they will bore in on you. So you have to remove those taps at the end of each season, and so it has to be done on the yearly. The new holes can be tapped or the diagonal 6 inches from this original point and 2 feet above or 2 feet below if you're on the same line. But if you move it over, then you can go 6 inches above or below, in order for that wound to heal for the next season. That's kind of the ideal situation. The next tip, number 4, is sap handling. When you're collecting your sap, you should be collecting it as soon as possible. If you are leaving it in your buckets for too long throughout the heat of the day, and that sap gets a little bit too hot, it could go off and it could turn yellow and go very cloudy, and then your sap is spoiled and you shouldn't boil it off because it will be off tasting. It needs to stay between 5 degrees, but certainly not over 10 degrees. So you've got that sweet spot of where it can stay. So a lot of times when you collect your sap, the bigger the buckets, once you keep them in a cooler environment, it can ice over in the evening, and so that helps to keep the temperature cold, that we learned that we didn't do last year. And so we kind of kept it around when it fit our schedules, because the reality of it was we still work both work full time, and so boiling it off was an investment of time. So anywhere from 16 to 18 hours is what it took to boil off the sap to make the syrup. So we ended up collecting it a little bit too long, and then we lost quite a bit of what we had, like over 100 liters or something like that of what we had collected. So we learned our lesson that way, unfortunately, because it went really cloudy and it just didn't look right. So we just kind of discarded that stuff. But the other thing is to, when you're collecting your sap, to make sure that you're using food grade buckets, and use those buckets specifically just for your sap, because if you use those buckets for other things, it will absorb any of the flavorings or any of the things that you use that bucket for. So tip number 5 is the rule of 86. This was something Frank and I only just learned this year, and that's more of a learning how to predict your yield and how much time you need to invest. And we were very reactionary to the season. We kind of just threw a few taps in the tree and just called it a day. We didn't really get technical. We didn't really get too much, but we did learn that we wasted a lot of our time, and we don't have a lot of that. So we wanted to make sure that commodity was well respected. So this year we learned a little bit more about how to collect the best amount of sap, boil it off in the timely manner that it requires, and stuff like that to get your sweet golden goodness. So the rule of 86 is suggesting, so typically it's a 40 to 1 ratio, right? So 40 liters of sap will give you 1 liter of syrup. And it is a large, like, you'll be surprised. Like, you got your 40 cups of water down to 1 cup. So it's an investment, right, of time. So the rule of 86 is essentially determining what your sugar content of your sap is, and you can identify that. And I don't think I have them in here. Oh, I do. Actually, just give me a sec. These are refractometers. So these are, you can purchase these just on Amazon. This is where we got ours, but we didn't run with one of these last year, so we just didn't know how much sugar content was in our sap. So you can get a refractometer that tests. This one tests the bricks. The moisture, enough moisture has been boiled out of it. But this one here tests. This refractometer tests the sugar content. I think each one of these is like 25 bucks. So it is a small investment if you're going to be boiling off sap, but if you don't have access to get one of these, you certainly don't need it. We did it fine last year without it, and we actually took a sample of our sap to one of the local larger producers, to determine that we weren't quite at 66 bricks, so we just didn't boil it off long enough. So what could happen if you don't do that? You could possibly cause mold. There could be there's too much moisture in the syrup, so it's much of a stable shelf life. You would have to use it quicker, which we did. It didn't last long, so we didn't have an issue. We didn't have to reboil, so we used it very quickly, and it never went off. And you would know if it went off, because it does lose its sweetness and it just tastes weird. So what you do is you take your 86 and divide it by whatever the percentage of sugar is. So in this example, typically when you've got 2% sugar content in your sap, it will require, so 86 divided by 2, which is 2% sugar, will require 43 liters of sap to 1 liter of syrup. So again, say if your sugar content in your sap was 3%, you just take 86 divided by 3, you're going to need 28.7 liters of sap to make 1 liter of syrup. So the higher the sugar content, the less amount of boiling off that you're going to need, and it's going to require less sap for you to do that. So that's kind of the rule of 86, if you will, and that was something that we just learned this year. So it kind of is giving us a good idea of how much sap to syrup we're going to yield, and we were pretty close to our numbers when we did this, our first boil off this year. Boiling off, some of the evaporation and what you need to use for your evaporating pans and things like that. We were gifted the large fryer that you'll see us using last year. Somebody was just getting rid of it, so they gifted it to us, knowing that we're boiling off. We had purchased a really large pan from a family friend that we thought would be good even in our high production. We just didn't have the means for a fire thing, and so we opted not to use that. This one is a little bit more manageable for one person. It worked really well for us on our first boil off, so we will definitely figure out how to streamline the process a little bit better, because it's just tending the fire, and that requires a lot of wood and a lot of manpower. So you can use stainless steel stock pots, anything like that. Our first year, last year, we decided we had a 3-burner pan or boiler that we just used, and we used our turkey fryer, and that was mistake number 6 million to whatever. You can't use an old turkey fryer because it does absorb those oils. As much as I wanted to think I scrubbed it and I cleaned it and I washed it really well, it just still absorbed a lot of that oily kind of residue, and you could see it in the syrup. So and then we lost that batch too. So it's when you're investing this kind of time, if I can stray you from doing those same mistakes. So there's nothing wrong with using a turkey fryer. Just make sure that you use it, designate and write SAP on it or something like that. That is all that goes in that turkey fryer. So, and that's a perfect little boiling system, and that is, I think it's a 40-liter vessel, so you can make sure, like, if that's what you want to do, but you're using propane for that, and the cost of propane is very expensive. So by the time we were said and done, by the time we went through all of the propane and the investment of collecting the sap and all of that kind of stuff, the ROI on that adventure just it didn't make sense for us to continue doing it, because although there's nothing more satisfying than doing this and knowing you made it, so absolutely for that reason, go ahead and do it. But if you're trying to do more of a volume scenario, you need to be a little more cost effective. It's just, wood is the way to do it. So you have to burn the wood and boil the sap off that way. That's the easiest or the most cost effective.
My front 2 containers are warming, and I do have a warming tray on top. Now the reason for the warming tray on top, so you add your cold syrup or your cold sap into your warming tray. This is the warming tray. I set mine right inside my pan. I fill it up with cold sap. As this is boiling, it's heating my sap in here, because if you add cold sap into your boiling sap, you're going to take your boil away. Detrimental, because when you lose your boil, it takes 20 minutes to get it back. With this size of pan, I'm only able to boil about 25 liters per hour, and that's if I have a good boil going. And so if you destroy your boil by adding a bunch of cold sap to it, you're knocking it from 20-25 down to 10-15. And when you're dealing with 350 liters, I'll let you guys do the math. So anyways, I'm looking at a 15-hour day, and my kids absolutely love this, and this is the reason why I'm standing here, is because my oldest son was out helping me this morning. He's probably going to come back out and help me again. I had a buddy here earlier. He was, and everybody's trying to learn, and it's great because...
And you can also get evaporators too. They sell these really fancy evaporators, and Frank's talking very highly about getting one of those. If we continue doing this, getting into a sugar shack kind of idea, and if we do get more of an evaporator scenario, we'll consider doing that, but they're expensive. So for now, the system that we have right now works perfectly fine. And so boiling off your sap, it's a wood boil, which is kind of the thing. I'm not going to get into the cubic of how much wood and bush cords and things like that you're going to need. But it's approximately half a bush cord for every 50 taps of syrup. So wood, it should also be split in smaller pieces so that you can get a hot fire. You need a hot fire because you really need to get that boiling temp to the right consistency, and that is kind of why you need to tend to it. You have to kind of make sure that you're constantly keeping that fire stoked and hot enough to keep your boil to approximately a 212 degree Fahrenheit or 100 Celsius to the 218 degree spot. Again, that's the sweet spot of boiling sap. So you need to make sure that you're keeping your fire hot enough to get your sap to boil off, and the evaporation of all of that, that is where you're going to get it to go quicker. So when you can't get that fire hot and you use those larger logs, that was the hardest part for Frank, was keeping that fire stoked and chopping that wood each time. Each time he'd think, okay, I'm almost there, so I just do another little batch. He would end up having to chop, and he was tired. We were out there till I think 2:30 the other morning because we were just tired because it was constantly having to chop more wood. So if you can kind of make sure that you have a good supply, but make it smaller, 2 to 3 inch pieces, that's the best way to make sure that your fire stays to temp. It is important to make sure that you're keeping your pan level high, because you do not want that sap to boil too low, or it will burn the syrup. So keeping and constantly adding and replenishing, finishing off that syrup, and making sure that you can put a mark on your pan if you'd like, just to see that once that boil, because you don't want to put too much sap. See, this is, again, there's a technical part which we didn't know. We just kind of threw in the sap the first year we did it, and then just let it go to boil. We did get syrup at the end of the result, but we did make some mistakes. But if you put your pan level and you add too much syrup, it takes away your boil, and so you got to bring it back up to temperature, and then you're adding extra time. And so there is a technical side to being able to make sure that your boiling sap doesn't drop below that 218 degree mark or that 200 degree mark, and getting it right there so that it starts to evaporate the water.
I can add some sap to that. How's my sap temperature? Yeah, that's good. It's good. That's probably around 75, 80 degrees. That's pretty good. But I've got 3 that are boiling up. This one is actually not too bad. So yeah, so let me just add some sap to that.
Now, so finishing off the syrup, and this is where it's kind of like the rubber meets the road. This is all of your effort, and all of it can be done, and Frank had mentioned it can be gone and lost in a moment, because if you're finishing off your syrup and you let that sap get too low in the pan, that's why what we like to do is we bring it down to 2 hours or an hour of boil time, so that there's still a good chunk of sap and it filled up our vessel, that we could bring it into the house and boil it off, and make sure that we were keeping an eye on it, because the pan is so, and if you don't have enough syrup to cover the entire bottom of the pan, it will burn, and then that will be an off-tasting syrup, which you don't want either. So finishing the syrup it's really hard to do it in a flat pan like that. So that's why it's kind of nice to bring it into the house. Removing it from the heat before that syrup is done is imperative, or it will burn.
So I have about 120 liters of sap left. I have brought out my propane boiler because I've been doing this already for 8 hours and I'm only 2/3 of the way through. So I have my propane boiler going. I just added some cold sap to it, but it'll be up and boiling here in a minute.
Backing up to the boiling sap section, keeping the temperature. You'll also notice during this boiling process time that you'll get foam. And so we use just a colander, like a strainer, to grab that foam and just take it out. It's what happens, you know, when you boil anything off, all of the foam kind of comes to the top. Sometimes that will happen in the sap too. So you just take that foam off, discard it, and continue your boil. When your syrup gets to the finishing stages, it has to do with our sea levels as well. So depending on where you are and what part of the country you're in and what your boiling water is, when the syrup reaches a boiling temperature of approximately 7.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius above the boiling temperature of water, your syrup is finished. I'm recording now.
Okay, ready? It's time to get off the syrup, get it on into our bottler. I mean, the reason why you want to go slow, if you look down in there, you'll see the syrup is gathering in the bottom of the filter. If you do it too fast, it'll fill up the filter and the filter will literally pull down inside. It'll come out of this. So I'm actually going a little bit too fast right now. I can see the filter's filling up. So I need to slow this down a little bit.
Filtering was another big mistake Frank and I made last year. So we had a lot of sugar sand in our syrup last year, and we didn't know what we had done wrong, so we again brought the sample over to guide us in what we had done wrong. And so there's a lot of debris out in the forest and out in the woods, and you're outside and you're burning off wood, there's ash, and so filtering is the key to making a very clear and concise syrup, and making sure that is, you don't want things floating in that. That's the reality of it is it's not pretty. And it certainly doesn't taste good either. We put up the kind of the papery type of filter inside that wool filter this year, which we didn't do last year, and it made a huge difference. One of the biggest things that you have to remember with your filters is to not wash them. Do not wash them with residues or liquid soaps or any sort of fabric softeners, or put them through the washing machine. I just literally ran hot water through them 3 or 4 times and let them soak upside down, and clean them out that way, because they will absolutely absorb any flavors that are in there. So make sure you don't do that. Filter the syrup hot, because if you don't, it will have a tendency to not, and you'll waste a lot of it. So you need to filter it while it's still hot. So that is kind of important. You can let it cool down a little bit, but you still should be bottling your syrup while it's hot. And so filtering it through during that time as well is important. All right, so there's only 2 more steps. So final steps is packaging, making sure that you package your syrup during while it's hot at 185 degrees or hotter. If it's heated over 195 degrees, you're going to have to filter it again. So using clean containers is so important, making sure that your containers are clean. And again, no detergents. Just make sure if you want to run it through your dishwasher, that's fine, but just don't put any sort of detergents or anything like that. Grating. And so, yeah, your grading is here in Ontario. If you are going to go ahead and sell your syrup, which we are not interested in doing, we're really just interested in preparing it for our family friends and giving it away, so people, you know, just as little gifts and things like that throughout the year. So that's kind of what we use it for. And the reason why big producers use these refractometers is it has to read OMAFRA registration. Anyways, that is the governing body in order for the food regulators to make sure that it is quality syrup to be able to be sold on the market. It has to be 66 bricks, and in order for it to do that, they will test it. So there's grade A syrup, just like there's grade A beef, things like that. So your big producers are really looking for that color, that consistency. It's just like a fine wine, and it's the same type of thing. So there's different grades. There's the golden, which is a very delicate taste. This is kind of between, I would say that this is between a golden and an amber. I think it's more golden. Frank thinks it's more amber, but I believe it's more golden. It is a very delicate taste of maple syrup. Some people don't love the taste of real raw maple syrup, and that could be because they've tasted a very dark brand. And again, that has to do with when the sap comes out of the tree, and so that has a much more robust flavor to it. So again, like any fine wine, it has to do with the grape and it has to do with the sap. So there's 4 different grades of syrup. So you've got your golden, which is a delicate taste. You've got your amber, which is more of a rich taste. You've got your dark, which is a robust taste, and you've got your very dark, which is a very strong taste. I'm going to just give you a quick checklist here just on my final thoughts. Please make sure these are the supplies that we needed and that we found very helpful to do the job. And again, you certainly don't have to have this stuff. You can go throw a tap in a tree with your tube and boil off for your family. It's a great little project if you have a maple tree, and show the kids how you can make homemade maple syrup. It's really fabulous. Eli loved it. He's really enjoying the process. Yes, we're doing it on a larger scale so that we can share it with our friends and family. But if you want to do it just for a simple little project for you and your family, go ahead and do that. That would be wonderful. All your checklist is you just need to make sure that your maple tree is healthy. Do not tap any dark spots or any areas that don't look healthy. Again, drill that hole in an upwards position. Get your tap in. Put your tubing into your bucket, and then making sure that those buckets are food grade, safe for bringing the sap collecting. Don't be using your dirty oil buckets like I did the turkey fryer. Tapping the tree drill bits and with a small hammer, tap, tap, tap. Don't bang it and reef it in there.
Yeah, okay. Let's start tapping. Tap, tappy, taparoo. Anybody know where that reference is from? Tap, tap. Taparoo.
Just tap it in. Just tap it in. Give it a little tappy. Tap, tap, taparoo.
Thermometer, yeah, you need a good if you don't have a refractometer, just a candy thermometer is perfect, and that will give you, that's what Frank and I used the first year, was a candy thermometer, and it was ideal. A good evaporating pan and a good stainless steel is best. If you can get a stainless steel on a wood burner, if possible. If you can't do the wood burning, then put it in your turkey fryer kind of idea. Over a propane burner is perfectly fine. Fire pits, wood stoves, gas grills, anything that you can get a constant heat on to keep that temperature hot so that you can boil off and evaporate that water. Synthetic wool and flat cone filters are important, and safe containers for jarring finished product. Anyways, guys, I hope you found that helpful. Again, learning from our mistakes, hopefully to prevent you from making the same. And just get out there and enjoy the spring. I know the spring is trying to come through here. We're starting to see some green in the grass. The dog is putting mud everywhere in the house, so we got footprints all through the house and on the bed and on the sofa. Wherever she lays, she's leaving a little trail behind her. So that is the sign that spring is here, and just get out and enjoy this season. So anyways, guys, thanks so much for hanging out again. This Sunday I will also have another video coming out for my Disney series, and this week we head to Animal Kingdom. Anyways, guys, until next time, stay safe and keep living.
I found peace with who I am now. It's the only me I'll ever be. I found there are other places, there are a million other faces. I found